Figuring out what staff you should hire, what you need to delegate, especially as you scale, is one of the hardest things practices can do. And it's hard to find really good partners who can make sure that you have the right team and that they are doing the job that you specifically need in your own practice. So excited to have today's guest on with us today.
Welcome to NatRev MD, a podcast where we share tips on optimizing medical billing and improving practice efficiency so you can have the business of your dreams. I'm your host, Dr. Heather Signorelli, founder of NatRev MD. Let's get started.
Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
So tell me how you went from pro hockey to the business, and tell me a little bit about just your journey.
For sure. So an unfortunate situation brought me to where I am today, but it was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. So I played 4.5, so almost 5 years of professional hockey. And in my last year, it was cut short because I herniated L3 to L5, cracked S1.5. So I was in tough shape for that winter into summer. And I figured that I had to make a jump. I had to go do something different. I didn't know what I was going to do just because I knew hockey wasn't going to work for me. And during my recovery process, I was wearing these sandals, this footwear called UFOs, which it emulates rolling your feet out on the top of tennis balls. So it just made the recovery process for my back, it just made it so much quicker than it would have been if I didn't have them on. So I thought, my dad was a sales guy. I knew sales was the way I was going to go. So I figured what better place to start than the place that fixed me up. And I reached out to UFOs and I started my sales career at UFOs. And once I started helping people and realizing how much that makes a difference in day-to-day life, I realized that healthcare was the space. And if I wanted to grow, then I would have to go to a technology / either equipment or technology route for myself, I should say. So I started in a SaaS space with reimbursement software, and seeing how that helped practices just gather money that they didn't have before and previously had to write off was very, very exciting. But I was a fully remote worker. So being fully remote was difficult for me. And I decided I wanted to be more face-to-face. So then I made the jump. And when I made the jump, I figured, why not try the equipment side while I'm making a transition anyways? So I went to PerkinElmer and sold laboratory instruments. Yeah, and the parts to laboratory instruments. So from that process, I learned the face-to-face with doctors and really dealing with more so the patient care side than the reimbursement side and the gathering revenue. So combining those two together, just coincidentally, I was having a conversation with a former professional hockey player who started a real estate company, VAs for real estate companies and for people just buying either commercial or residential real estate throughout the country, and a VA just as an executive assistant to help them out. And he saw through personal connections that it could be obviously you're going to have to get different VAs for the medical space than you're going to have for the real estate space because they need to be medically trained and all of that. But he figured it would be a big help for these different practices. And when he was searching around, it's just, we don't have a lot of competitors and it's not really something that a lot of people know about. And it's hard to hire at full price if you're trying to hire locally because of minimum wage and how high it is right now. So he asked me to come over. I took on the director of sales and business development roll over here, and the rest is kind of history.
That's awesome. Well, that's good. I mean, you've kind of been in our space with the revenue side. I'm a physician, as you know, by background, and I think I've seen my own friends who've struggled with really understanding, how they can really have their practice be successful, whether that's the revenue side or the support side, which was what we're talking about today. It's not easy. I mean, we're not taught this in medical school. You spend, 10 plus years getting your medical education. You don't have a lot of the business education, and it's kind of trial by error, I guess. You're just trying to figure it out. So, we see a lot of our practices who use virtual assistants, especially for that front end piece of the revenue. So for us, we're RCM firm, but we don't typically do the front end piece. We're not typically doing eligibility or prior auths. Because I do believe, and maybe you have an opinion on this, like the people who are answering the phone to schedule the appointments, I believe that those are really helpful to have those same people connected with the eligibility team. Do your virtual assistants connect those dots, or do you see it maybe both ways where they're not scheduling the patients and just doing eligibility? Tell me a little bit about, kind of what you see different practices doing with those virtual assistants on that front end side.
It's both. It depends on volume, of course. So if you have more patients coming in, then you're going to have multiple virtual assistants. But it's honestly it's preference for the practice operator, the doctor at the practice. So if you want that virtual assistant that's on your front end, dealing with those eligibility checks, dealing with that patient communication, to be working with your eligibility team, and you have a high volume, you can just hire multiple virtual assistants to do both of those roles. Because, like I said earlier in the call, they are medically trained. That a lot of them have been priorly in working with reimbursement, either for a reimbursement company like your own, or working in a hospital alongside. So it really depends on what the practice owner wants and how they want to operate it, but they can do either. I do find it to be very beneficial if you have them connected with your eligibility team, because then everything just flows a little bit easier. If there are any questions that come up, everybody's involved, and they can kind of be more efficient with their workflow.
Yeah, I think that it's hard sometimes because I love to control things. It's just, I think maybe it's part of the doctor mentality. I know it's not just to doctors. I think there's plenty of us on the planet, but it's hard letting go of those positions not being in the office. But at the same time, the practices that I see being most successful are the ones that have been able to let that go and be able to say, okay, these are the things I'm going to outsource, to have somebody remote doing it. You get the economies of scale. I think
Mhm.
as long as you have the training and the accountability loops, you can have a very successful offshore or, outsourced partnership with the virtual assistants. How have you seen practices really engage those individuals so they're part of the team, but also relinquish some of that control so that they can, do those jobs and take that off the practice hand? Because I think it's just too much for a front
No,
desk.
100%. Yeah. And it's very depending, like I said earlier, depending on where you are in the country, hiring locally is just so expensive. It's
California
impossible.
especially.
Yeah, big time. So, and the revenue that you're missing out on that you'd have to write off, some people don't even know they're missing out on it. So, because you have so many different things that you have to do, that you're not only losing revenue, but then the patient experience, because of how burnt out you are, becomes a little bit worse than what it would be if you're able to offshore, outsource that. But the thing is, like you said, it's very difficult to trust that process. And we completely understand that. So, when we bring on a different practice, right? It's a private practice or a hospital, it doesn't matter. What we do is we conduct an interview process. So we only hire 5% of the people that apply to our company, just because of all the boxes that you need to check, right? So when we vet out that down to five, so if there was 100 people that applied, we now have 5 people that we can choose from that we'd be able to present to a practice. And when we present that candidate to the practice, we turn our cameras off and we let you interview that person one on one. So you know exactly who's coming into your practice, how well they speak, if they're able to fit in your space, because someone in California might work differently than someone in New York. So that process, and we got to gain your trust as Reva Global Medical. We need to gain your practice's trust. So we'll take the training process on in house. So we'll pay for all that. And we'll just, yeah. So we'll make sure that you know who you're going to get and you know that they're going to be fully trained. And once they hit the ground running, you don't have to start paying them until they are working in your practice, ready to go, knowing what they're doing.
Do
No,
you guys
no.
set up policies and procedures as well?
Of course.
Okay, that's awesome. That's
Yeah.
great.
So we have SOPs in place before. So you know exactly what the expectation of this virtual assistant is. And we'll also provide you a client services manager. So that client services manager can report to you either daily or weekly, depending on your schedule, on how that person is doing, what the goals for that virtual assistant was, if they hit that goal, if they exceeded it, how many calls they answered, what percent of revenue that was missed before is now getting brought back into the practice, and then just patient communication and patient experience. So obviously, as you know, it's tough. Day before, you like to reach out to somebody, hey, you have an appointment tomorrow, because they might have forgot about the appointment. And then if you reach out to that patient, that experience is going to be much better, because then they can obviously reschedule that appointment, but also for your practice, you can find someone else to place in that spot. Reach out to your client list, to people that don't necessarily have an appointment, but you can call them and say, hey, listen, a spot opened up tomorrow. Do you have any availability? Are you able to make it? And we just have found for practices that doesn't only make the patient experience better, but it also brings in a lot more revenue that was once lost to.
And I think that that's a big a big thing to recognize. Like when I see our practices, they have someone in the front desk, right? They're obviously checking in patients, they're handling things that are coming
Mhm.
across their desk. But that more strategic, I need to make sure that we are prepared for the next day. That piece of stuff often gets put back to the back burner, right? Because you've got somebody complaining, you've got the phones ringing off, you've got faxes coming in, you've got doctors asking questions. And so to have somebody dedicated who's not sitting in the chaos of a front desk, which if anybody's been in a practice, it's the chaos of a front desk.
Yeah.
Like they can really think through, okay, I need to do eligibility. I need to do, prior authorizations and I need to, figure out the failure points of certain verifications. And for the listeners, like these are the number one denials that we get is really eligibility verification, prior
Mhm.
auth, depending on the type of practice that you're in,
Yeah.
obviously. So
Mhm.
that if you can really make sure that those tasks are managed, like great, then it's more revenue. But then the other piece that you just mentioned is this idea behind and appointment reminders, which maybe that's automated through your software, but then okay,
Mhm.
open slots, I have no shows. How do I get a wait list to fill those no shows so that I have no wasted you know appointment slots for your
Yeah.
physicians? Because it's you'd be surprised. I mean, you end up, I mean, I'm sure you can have 20% open availability, and if you don't have somebody filling those spots, then that's overhead you're not covering. So
Exactly. And that's kind of where we came into play, right? We noticed all of these different spaces where there were gaps and it's just adding someone, it's the clerical versus the clinical work, right? Like you should do the doctors go to school for so long just to do that clinical work, to have that patient care, where that clerical work is was driving the patient experience down and it's driving a lot of doctors to burnout because you're just wearing so many different hats that you shouldn't have to be wearing. And whether it be, I think that in every spot of your workflow that you should be using something, obviously you can't pay for it always, but like a reimbursement software should be in your CR, or it should be in your system that you're using right now because you don't know, like I said before, like sometimes you don't know where you're missing out on that revenue, but you're missing a percentage of it for whatever the denied claim is. And then we add that human value to it in case the reimbursement software doesn't work, then you call out to the insurance company, but that process becomes a lot quicker and you're able to do a lot more in little time. So it's just making your workflow more efficient as wherever you can, right?
yeah, it's the book, oh, I'm blanking on his name, the Who Not How book by, I think it's Dan Miller. I may be getting that wrong, but the Who
Okay.
Not How is this premise around delegation. And I think for independent practices, really of whatever size, we have practices that are,
Hmm.
single physicians, we have practices that have, 20, 30, 40 physicians. And so the who not how approach, when I see the most successful physicians, it's okay, what is my zone of genius? What am I going to say? These are the things that me personally, has to do. And then these are the things that I'm going to start to delegate. And that happens over time. But I see these roles as sort of that low hanging fruit, one of the first things you start to delegate. And especially even if you have a front desk staff, as your patient volume increases, those individuals can't handle everything. And so having this individual who can help triage some of those things that we just mentioned, I think is key.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's honestly for our business, like for Reba Global Medical, like that's where we look at ourselves as consultants, right? So we look front end and back end. That's the first two places. You can use us anywhere along your workflow, but the most important places that we've seen from practice to practice, because it doesn't matter how big you are. If you're an IVF practice and you're only seeing so many patients, those tests are still very expensive. So it can matter what you're doing as well as the volume of patients coming in. So no matter who we're talking to, we always look at that front end and then at that back end.
All
That's
right.
where we.
So I'm going to ask some questions that, I can already hear my practices that we work with thinking about. Okay. So if they're like, I have no idea what I need, I don't know what day it is, I've just trying to keep my head above water. Can I come to you and say, okay, here are the problems I'm having. Help me craft the role and the job, description to help this work.
Yes. So that's what my initial call with the practice will be is I'll just take a step back and I'll look at the pain points. How many calls are you receiving each day? How many missed calls are you getting? Do you have a voicemail inbox that's through the roof? Because that's obviously what's leading to missed appointments and lost revenue. And then I'll ask how many denied claims are you dealing with? Do you have a reimbursement software in place? So do you have an AR backlog that you're currently dealing with? And how long, so just certain questions, I hate to call them pain point questions, but you need to know what's going on. You need to know what's wrong. And then we will find, and then when we're doing our our hiring process for the candidate, we have all of those ideas in mind. So we know exactly who we're looking for this one practice. That's a little bit of the reason why it takes us so long to hire the right person, because not so long, but it takes so many candidates to get the right one, is because we're looking for a specific problem to fix in a specific practice, and we're finding that right person, like the exact right person to do it. So it's very important though.
And I think of the front end eligibility prior auth. I also think we have many of our practices struggling with the back end, meaning we send the patient statements, but nobody's really paying the patient statements.
Yeah.
And so calling patients and having a script together to say, okay, hey, we've got to start collecting these balances. Is that a service that you guys provide?
Yeah. And that's a tough conversation to have, right? So training those VAs to make that conversation as comfortable and as easy as possible for both the patient and obviously the VA. And that's a big part of the training, because the patient communication back and forth, like, you never want to send a patient a bill, but if you have to, at the end of the day, that's how it goes. So that conversation is going to be one of the toughest ones you're going to have with that patient. And you want to make sure it goes as well for the patient as possible, so that we have extensive training along those conversations that they have to have. And then we can also use programs that can show you the patient's propensity to pay. It's through different, they're all HIPAA certified, but through different softwares, just so they can guide, they have guidelines on how to have that conversation and where they're at with their life.
So the other thing that we often hear is, okay, so what's the process look like for working with you? Are they hired onto your payroll and the practice is paying you, or are they hired onto the practice what does that arrangement look like?
They're your worker. They're only working for your practice. They're dedicated to you, but the first way you just said it. So we'll hire them on, and then the practice will pay us.
Got it. Okay. And then do you do part-time or primarily only full-time roles?
Just because of how many things that we like, how extensive the vet out process and how hard it is to find the candidates and how much they can do along a workflow, we only offer full time, because we find that when we do that consulting, when we take that step back, usually if someone's reaching out to us needing help, we'll be able to find a full time role. And obviously, it's going to be a fraction of the price of hiring in house.
And, I know we've kind of touched on this, but do you have numbers in terms of what folks are maybe losing in terms of revenue from lost eligibility? Like, say somebody doesn't have this role met, and right now they're having denials, which we see again is our top denial. I think of this as they can be losing, close to six figures, especially on a seven-figure business from an annual basis. Would you agree with those numbers?
It depends on the technologies that they have in place as well. If they're just doing eligibility, or if they're just going to do insurance verification and they're trying to go collect denied claims by having one person have a phone call and reach out to them, and they do not have a virtual assistant in place, yeah, definitely at least six figures.
Yeah.
But if they do have, it can vary, of course, depending on what technologies you have in place. But the more efficient you're going to be, the more revenue you're going to bring in, and the less burnout you're going to have across your staff, for sure. So I think six figures is definitely a safe place to put it on a seven-figure business.
Yeah. And again, hopefully folks listening know their denial numbers, because that is the number one thing that has to come from your RCM partner. So if you don't know those, make sure that they're getting those to you, because that's really, really key. Denials are a big part of understanding how to fix revenue. So, okay. So if you've got a physician who's thinking, I just don't have the time for this right now. This is, not something I can handle. What would you say to them so that they realize the importance of this? And get this going.
Besides asking those questions of I'd have to put my sales hat on a little bit, of course, but I'd have to ask them the questions on how many calls are you receiving, because at the end of the day, this is putting time back on your calendar, not taking time off of it. So yeah, you can talk to me and you have to look at me, which is unfortunate for a couple minutes, but once you get that help in-house, you're going to see how much time is put back on your schedule. You're not going to have to go chase those claims. You're not going to have to reach out to a patient to make sure they're coming. You don't even have to go worry about making sure that the patient's getting all the right medicine, the medications, because you're going to have someone doing that for you on the back end. And it's really just going to put time back on your day, and you will see it in the first month. All of our practices have come back to us after the first month saying, it's usually can we have another one? But it's always, they've just been so helpful. We didn't know, a lot of them say we didn't know that we were missing out in so many different areas. So I'm not saying that practices aren't as efficient as they should be. It's just there's always a way to be more efficient and bring in revenue.
Well, it brings me back to that book, The Who Not How. It's in stages, right? So there's always something to optimize, and that's within any business, anywhere.
Of course.
And
Yeah.
so it's just about stages. What stage are you in, and what can you optimize today? And as I tell my kids, get 1% better every day, and that's what you can expect. No one's going to be perfect. All right. So folks who are listening, where can they find you? And again, we'll put stuff in the show notes, but where can folks find you if they're interested in delegating some things?
Yeah, absolutely. So I and the company are on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. So you can find us there. RevaGlobalMedical.com. So we'll have everything you need to know on what we can do, how we do it, and how we operate on that website. And then if you just want to reach out to me personally, it's tim@RevaGlobalMedical.com. I'd be happy to have a conversation with any and everybody just on ways that we can help.
Great. I love it. And just for folks listening, we have personally, used virtual assistants over the years and have found it to be extremely valuable as part of our business too. So look forward to, chatting with you guys and going from there. So it was great to have you on the show today. Appreciate, your help and support and educating just around this topic. Because again, I feel like it's one of those things where it's hard to delegate some of these things, but it's really critical from a revenue and efficiency standpoint. So
trust is hard, but there's a way for sure.
It's hard. Okay. Well, it was great to have you on. And again, we'll put the show notes in. And if you guys like the episode, we'd love for you guys to share it with a colleague or a friend. And we'll talk to you on our next episode. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Dr. Eddie.